ES Audio.
From the Evening Standard in London, I'm Mark Blunden, and this is The Leader. Britain's technology sector has reached $1 trillion in value. That's over £800 billion, which makes the UK only the third country to hit this financial milestone after America and China. All this success has brought untold wealth for many London founders who are revealed in the first Evening Standard Tech Rich List. And later in this show, you'll hear just how one invests his fortune. But has London lost its shine as tech firms look elsewhere in the world post-Brexit? And how diverse are the list's entrepreneurs? The Standard City team who compiled the data show the 100 people appearing on the list have a combined wealth of over £600 billion. Vacuum cleaner tycoon Lord Dyson tops the list with a wealth estimate of over £17 billion, while Sir Richard Branson and Lord Sugar also make the top 10. Plus, there are more than 20 unicorns, that's tech firms worth over $1 billion each, including fast food app Deliveroo and payment service Wise. In part 2, we'll hear from one biotech entrepreneur and investor in psychedelic drugs like magic mushrooms for therapeutic use, who's made the rich list and has a few quid in the bank. But first, let's find out from Evening Standard tech reporter Simon Hunt, who's spent a long time crunching these numbers, about the significance of the list.
It's important to point out that a lot of this wealth is quite new. There are a handful of older names on this list, like Richard Branson and Alan Sugar and so on, but so much of this wealth has been generated in about the last 5 years or so. I mean, we had a bunch of IPOs in the last couple of years and lots of really big funding rounds. And there are only 3 countries in the world that can boast having a $1 trillion tech sector, and the UK is now one of them.
How did you calculate these huge sums, and is it cash in the bank?
I think for most people on the list, it's not going to be cash unless a handful of them sold the businesses on or sold it to a private equity company. And for them, it probably is cash. But in the case of people who run public companies, I'm generally looking at the shares that they own and the value of those shares as they appear on the stock market, or how much they're being paid according to those companies' annual reports. For private companies, it's a little bit more complicated. So for them, I'm sometimes looking at how much revenue they generate to figure out how valuable it would be by comparing it to public companies that are in the same field. And in some cases, for newer companies where I don't have that information, I'm looking at funding rounds.
Who's up and who's down? Any surprises?
One of the people who's quite significantly down this year is Richard Branson, who, of course, is on the list primarily because he created Virgin Orbit, which was set to be the UK's first satellite launch business. That hasn't gone well, to put it mildly. The company has filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and his share in it was worth something like $1 billion at its peak, and now it's virtually zero. So he has lost quite a lot from his wealth over that period. In terms of people who've done better, Ewan Blair has done well. His company has had a fresh funding round recently.
How diverse is the top 100?
It's certainly true to say the great majority of the people on this list are men. Most of them are white men. And I think the diversity issues in tech have been fairly well publicized. And the wealth of the people at the very top is the sort of best expression of how bad the diversity problem is. But it's also not necessarily as bad as this list might suggest, in the sense that a lot of these companies now have lots of senior management roles that are women, but what happens is, because these men were founders and the businesses are 5 or 10 years old now, they hold almost all the capital in the business, and so we attribute all of the wealth to them.
How's London's tech business outlook going forward?
I think we're definitely in more troubled waters now than we were a few years ago. Obviously the economy is not performing as well here as it did. I mean, that's true here as well as worldwide. The valuations of a lot of tech companies were very high in 2021 and they've dropped off a bit since. And a lot of startups now find it much harder to get funding now than they might have done a couple of years ago. And of course, you have the European issue as well. And then it's not as straightforward to trade in Europe if you set up in the the UK. And if you want to start a business primarily with the market of Europe in mind, then it wouldn't really make sense to start in the UK. Having said that, I think obviously if you're a manufacturer, your biggest problem now is supply chain issues and your products being held up at the border. But if you're a tech company, none of that really applies. And of course, you're aiming for a global market, of which the European market is but a small piece.
Let's go to the ads. Coming up, magic mushrooms, ancient art, and London's post-Brexit business landscape with a tech founder worth nearly £1 billion. Why not hit rate and follow in the meantime? Welcome back. Now we're lucky to be joined by one London-based founder who the ES Tech Rich List estimates to have a net worth of over £880 million. Let's find out from Christian Angermayer, founder and principal owner of Apeiron Investment Group, if London's still the place to be or not.
Well, truth is we're not that much investing in London. We do have some UK, respectively London, investments, but sort of London is an office, so of my family office, Apeiron Investment Group, sort of our main place of incorporation as well as Malta. And we have offices in London, Berlin, San Francisco, and in the UAE. And I'm happen to live here as well, or it's my number one place of living. Yeah, but actually, if I'm very honest, over the last years, the UK lost a bit in terms of both, I think, attractiveness. This is why I'm also spending a lot of time in the US and in the Middle East, but also in the sort of attractiveness of startups here, which I hope gets better, because the short version, I was always like, don't want to open the Brexit discussion if it was right or wrong, but it is what it is. But it would offer an amazing opportunity for the UK and London if you treated it right, or if you made the right thing out of it. And that is a complete disaster, unfortunately.
What's the attractiveness of living in London for you?
The attractiveness used to be, when I moved here in 2013, that it was by far the most sort of energized European city, and it's losing that as well, especially compared, I think it's still, to be fair, it's still the most energized city in Europe. The problem is, though, that in an absolute terms, entire Europe, including the UK and London, went down a lot, and the US kept its place or even went up, and then other regions in the world did the same.
What's been the post-Brexit challenges?
Over the last years, it's just a series of negative sort of headlines out of politics, but also like there is no positive momentum, and somewhere that is translating sort of the energy of the people. I think many, many people are feeling it, because many of my peers, by the way, are at least considering getting additional other places. So I have not a single meeting with other investors, owners of family offices who don't have the same view than I have, and think, okay, where can I actually go? Maybe you keep the place here. People who have children, I just had this discussion yesterday with a big family. They have the issue, obviously, children is a bit more complicated to move, but like most people actually want to move, or at least have a second place or third place in another country.
What's your future business focus with psychedelic drugs?
One area we invested a lot and built actually up some big companies ourselves is the idea of bringing psychedelics back, which are compounds like so-called magic mushrooms. The active ingredient is called psilocybin, ketamine, DMT, whatever, for therapeutic use. That's very, very important. So not to make them consumer legal, but to have them as an approved medication, which can be taken with a doctor. So it's a great question, because finally I can say something very positive, because here the UK actually had a leading role to play, or has. So especially Imperial College has been and still is one of the leading places for research into the potential of psychedelic compounds.
And you have to tell us about your art collection.
My big passion, bringing psychedelics back into the medical world as medical treatment. And the interesting fact is that not just psychedelics, that psychedelics had been, or some of them at least, had been really a medical approved therapy in the 50s and 60s by a Swiss company called Sandoz. They had approved psilocybin, which is magic mushrooms, and LSD. But actually psychedelics played a vital role as far back as we can go in human sort of recorded history. In fact, actually, most religions, including Christianity, are based on psychedelic consumptions of their founders. And by the way, provenly based on it. So my art collection mainly features ancient artifacts of ancient religions, like the Eleusinian Mysteries or the cult of Osiris in ancient Egypt, which show that link between sort of the creation of religion and psychedelic substances, and that they actually had always been, what I want to make them again, is a healing substance. It's sculptures like of gods and goddesses. It's actually wall paintings from ancient Egypt, more than 4,000 years old. It's objects like cups and stuff like that who were used in these ceremonies. Yeah, but it's ancient stuff. So I'm not actually a big believer in modern art because it's sometimes nice to watch, but like I just don't see the price of how I can justify some values because it's a piece of paper on the wall. So I'm also personally, but art is very personal. I'm a history geek. Like I love sort of what we can learn out of history and like the evolution of humans.
There's more on this story in the Evening Standard newspaper and online at standard.co.uk. That's The Leader. We're back on Tuesday at 4 p.m.